Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with host Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you never miss an episode. Search for us on your favorite podcast app, or you can find the podcast on jimmyhinton.org and findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so we can spread the word. If you would like to support us and get exclusive rewards, go to patreon.com/speakingout. Find a tier that best fits you and join as a patron of the podcast. Now let's get into the show.
Very theatrical.
I grew up in it's a similar church structure. We have similar roots in the Anabaptist movement. And I see like this really strong patriarchal system that is just so abusive and belittles women and children. And the men don't know they're doing it. Like that's the sad thing. They're clueless. They think this is biblical fact, and the men are the one who lead in the home. They're the spiritual leaders in the home, because women, I guess, are too dumb to be able to read their Bible and and talk to their kids.
No.
So,
if you read the Bible as a plain woman and you have questions, you're now questioning the Word of God, and you should stop reading the Bible so much. Quote, that's exactly what I was told.
wow.
Yeah.
So you have this system where it's just this really toxic structure where in the plain community it's magnified because you're told don't even be alone with people outside of the family. But then as a child and as a woman, you have to answer to the men. Turns out the men are the very people abusing you. The elders have a vested interest in maintaining silence, even if they're not the abusers, because it's going to hurt the image of Christ, right? You guys speaking up about abuse. So it's also going to there's the headship. You have to look at the headship order. So if somebody in the family stumbles, we'll use the word stumble, right? So if somebody has sex with their sister, but stumble sounds better. If they stumble, it's then the husband or the father has to stand before God and give an account for every sin that happened underneath him within his home, because he is responsible. So you are then causing your father the liability of losing his salvation by your sin, by your stumble. So it is easier for the husband to keep it quiet. I don't understand how, because if you're going to have this huge screenplay of your life in front of the pearly gates of heaven, it's going to come out eventually. But that's something that I think that was taught a lot, where it's like, you can't cause your father to have to stand before God and give an account for your sin, because that could jeopardize his salvation. Yeah. I hear this a lot too. When I confront abuse, one of the first things that people come back in conservative churches, one of the first things that comes back is, well, why would we want to bring all of this to light? Because it will ruin an otherwise perfectly good man's reputation. I mean, that's the staple response. So my question, it's one of the questions I wrote down, which is the greater sin, and which holds a heavier penalty, raping children or questioning the authority of men?
Ooh. Well, Alex, let's do an honesty for 1,000, please.
Well,
Misty, you look like you're you look like you're ready to throw an answer out there. Which is the greater sin, right? Rape of a child or questioning the authority of a man?
Definitely questioning authority. Through the work that I've done, I've interviewed so many people, so many ex-plain people. And the one thing that I hear the most is, yes, my brother or my cousin or my uncle, my dad, he raped 10 children. But, when I came forward and talked about it and they told me to be quiet and I wasn't quiet, I was the one that got in trouble. This is what people, over 100 ex-plain people have told me. Now, I was the one that got in trouble. And if I wasn't quiet about it, they said, oh, we're going to shun you. We're going to put you in the, this one lady said she was shunned for 9 months. And her uncle, who had raped I think it was a 5-year-old girl. He was shunned for like 4 weeks. He was shunned for 4 weeks, brought back to the church, and they said, you're going to stop doing this. We're going to forgive you. He said, yes, yes. And she said, how do you prove that he stopped that? They can't prove it, right. Until it pops up again that he did it. But me, because I'm not quiet about it, because I want to keep these children safe, I'm shunned for 9 months. And of course, she ended up leaving, but she went to the police. She's shunned by the whole community. And, that's just the commonly what happens. But, this guy who raped this 5-year-old, he's back in the church,
fine, upstanding, peaceful, gentle Amish man.
Exactly.
Oh,
disrupting his life. Yep.
How
for
dare
those
you.
of us outside of your community, the word shunning doesn't have the same impact as it does to those inside. That's a horrific thing, right? We don't understand.
Yeah, because outside, if we're shunned, we use a different term for it. It's disfellowshipped. If you're disfellowshipped, just go to another church.
Right.
There are a million of them,
right?
For you guys, to be shunned from your community, where do you go?
Right.
You've not been equipped to even know how to begin to live.
Not only that,
right?
But Amish people are very prejudiced against like Jehovah's Witnesses and other religions. Like they talk a lot of smack about those religions. It's like you've been taught that this is the one true way and the only way,
right?
And now you no longer have any of that, and you also don't realize or understand necessarily that it's okay for you to go and find a church that is welcoming to you. You don't have any of the tools to find a church. You don't even know what to look for in a church.
You don't even have a car or a job.
You don't exist on paper.
Who are you going to call? Ghostbusters? Like you can't just call,
right.
Really, like you have to look at the very basic implications that comes along with a lifestyle choice of reporting abuse. It's not safe unless you have a safety net out in the outside world. It is not safe.
Right.
Mary and I talk about this a lot. I would not recommend somebody that is just in the church to report unless they have a backup plan, because it can be very dangerous.
Right.
And that sucks to even say that like that,
does.
but you're right. Like that's reality. And I think about this too, when you guys are talking about this, it's kind of like a caste system in Indian culture, right?
Yeah.
Where you have your upper class, your middle class, your lower class, and then there's the slum people that live in the slums.
I'll be the slums.
Like if you're a Mary living in the slums, you're at the bottom of that that social structure. I assume people know that, so they see you walking down the little country road, and they look at you and they're like, why would I help you? So it's not like you're going to have neighbors even within the Plain community come to your side.
No.
Well, and I think it's important here to talk about the fact that when you're just disfellowshipped, like you said, you just go to another church. But when you're excommunicated, you're not just losing your church, you're losing all your financial resources.
Yes.
Their jobs are within the community. And as a woman, you don't have a bank of any finances. You lose your family, all your family, because if they stand with you, then they're excommunicated. So you have no relation to turn to. So unless you happen to have a good friend on the outside, excuse me, that you had prior connection with that will believe your story, you have no one. You have no place to live. And the first thing they're going to go after is your children, because God forbid you take your children out into the outside world and corrupt them. So there's so many different things to consider that there's no appropriate resources for someone who wants to flee and report abuse. There's no safety net. There's no safety net. And also, if you do go to your neighbors or somebody, they need to be prepared for the dangerous situation that can get into, where they're going to, the ministry is going to show up. People are going to start harassing you and taking action. It is not this like, oh, I've just left the farm and everything is okay.
No.
Like so many people think it is. It's dangerous. So people need to be aware. If you're taking in somebody, there are circumstances where you are going to be in danger, and you need to be like prepared for that.
And you know,
contrary to popular opinion, the plain people are not non-resistant.
Yeah.
They just don't go to war.
Right.
Can I also talk about this as like for the people that are interested in helping Amish people? If somebody discloses to you and you go back and report to their ministry or their community or their family, you are endangering their lives. Do not do that. Do not ever go tell another Amish person what somebody has disclosed to you about their abuse. You are endangering their lives. They could possibly be killed over it.
Or sent to a facility. I mean, there's a lot of danger. Yeah.
That's what that's what I wanted to point out. You know, Jasper, when you said that they're in danger, I don't want people to picture, well, this is just more shunning. No, this is like literal physical, like they send mobs to people's houses. They pull children from mothers' arms. They beat the crap out of people physically. It is dangerous, dangerous, dangerous. And I've read and listened to story after story after story where I'm like, this is like the Amish gangsta paradise, right? You know, like there's the Weird Al did the song gangsta, the Amish paradise.
Maybe he missed the title. He should have called it Predator's Paradise.
Yeah, it really is. Like they form, I mean, essentially it's a gang mob, and they're violent.
It's the mafia.
Yeah,
but Jimmy,
they really are.
Jimmy, their apple butter is so good, and they're so
and I love
sweet.
their furniture, and they're so
beautiful.
forgiving. Oh my gosh! And do you know they farm and they have these sweet little children, and their children never step out of line.
Yep, I know.
I can add to that. When I went to that neighbor lady for help, she did that. She said, "Okay, wait here. Let me go talk to him." Her and her husband, and they went up and they talked. They went to the house and. They confronted him, and he told them, I mean, he was very, I don't know, psychotic. I don't know what you would label him, psychologically, but he was very arrogant and smirky. I was watching from the window, and he was like smirking at them, and she came back and she's like, "You've got to go to the police." She said, "We just went up there and we talked to him," and he was like grinning and laughing at us. He's like, like I could just go over there and smother her in her sleep, and she would be buried in an Amish, grave, and nobody would care what happened to her. He told them that to their face.
Wow.
And I mean, it scared me so much. And so, I went to the police. Of course, they did nothing. They came out and they saw this, cute Amish family. And then the lady that I reported to, she was on parole. So she's like, "Okay, yes, we're going to drive you to Seattle, but I have to wait 30 days for my parole, to be okay, something how the parole works." So she's like, "Okay, stay in this back trailer for 30 days until we can drive you," because, I didn't have any ID. I didn't know how to get on a bus myself and all of this stuff. So I stayed in this trailer, this like 13-foot trailer behind her shop where she was living. And it didn't have a lock on the door. So I put these metal cans on twine and I tied it to the door. And I stayed up every single night for 30 days with a broom in my hand. And she had dogs. And like maybe 3 or 4 times, those dogs went crazy in the middle of the night. Like I knew he was out there trying to comfort me. And a couple of times I fell asleep with the broom in my hand. And I mean, it was just so terrifying. And yeah. It is very dangerous when you confront
them. And that's
them.
the reality.
Do not. Yeah. No. Do not.
The reality people face, right? And I think it's so hard for people like us on the outside to even comprehend that these are not like a handful of cases. Like this is the norm. This is what life is like inside the plain communities. And it's, just that whole idea of like, somebody said it, we don't exist I think Mary, you said it, we don't exist on paper. Like we literally don't exist. There's no identification, no birth certificate, no bank account, absolutely nothing that
traceable.
traces you that
Right.
says I
Yeah,
exist.
yes.
So when you leave,
Mm.
I mean, like you, Misty, how do you buy a bus ticket to get out of there? You can't do it.
I had to, so when I left, I didn't know you had to have ID. Like I was in such a strict community and so sheltered. I just didn't know anything about the outside world. And before that, I'd been with my non-Amish parents, but I was on a mountain. I didn't know anything about the outside world. So when I left, I was fortunate to have this lady that took me in. She was a step aunt. Very fortunate for her. But she took me to the congressman's office to get some form of ID, because she's like, how do we get your ID? How do we get, your birth certificate, any of that stuff? So we went to the congressman's office and talked to, I don't know, the congressman's assistant or whatever they're called. And, I showed him stuff to prove that I was Amish, because it was right after 9/11. This was 2005. So I took an Amish apron with me, letters from my sister. She's like, we've got to prove somehow that you were really Amish. So he believes us.
Wow.
So I took this stuff with me. He was laughing. Like, I think he kind of could see from me that, I wasn't a terrorist, or I don't know.
Yeah.
But he was laughing. He was like, yes, I believe you. And, he had to write some authorization for me to get a passport. That was my first ID. It was easier to get a passport than anything else. But yeah, he wrote something. It took many months, like 7 months to get it. But yeah, I don't know how other ex-Amish do it. Like I wasn't connected to the ex-Amish community. I didn't even know there was an ex-Amish community at that time. So for me, that's how I started to exist, I guess. After that, I got a bank account, ID, those things. But I mean, it was very...
And how many years ago was that? Because if you look at where our society is going with the real ID, which has been pushed back because of COVID, but it's going even deeper and deeper into having to prove that you are really you. And the struggle for all of us, we have to realize that even if they do pay taxes, which at least in our church, we were told we needed to, your children are not allowed to be your tax write-offs. So you don't claim any of your children if they do have a social security number. So there's no record of you at all. Yeah. If you don't have a bank account, you've never filed 1099s or even W-2s, you don't have a social or anything. And so how are we going as a society to help support people to prove that they actually do exist, especially in these deeper, more conservative Amish communities where there's not even a birth certificate? Maybe they don't even know what day they were born or any type of track record. Like there needs to be something in place, or else it just makes it's one more thing.
So I didn't have a birth certificate or a social security number or anything, right? So I didn't exist. And I started with trying to get a social security number, and they told me I had to get a birth certificate first, but this was in 2004, right? So in order to get an ID, a real ID, like they're going to have to get these documents first. But how do they go about getting these documents? So I had to prove that, again, like Misty said, that I was Amish. I had to prove that my name was my name. And I had people who wrote notarized letters for me in regards to getting my birth certificate created.
Yeah.
And once I got that, then I was able to go apply for a social security number. And that actually was a lot easier.
Yeah. So these are things that law enforcement and social workers and people on the outside need to understand, that we need to have procedures for this if we're going to support people on the outside. It's just like the basic of creating an identity. So that way they know, but that way people from the inside know that they need these things in order to leave. And it's not this we're just going to pull you out and, help you escape and then try and figure it out on the outside.
You can't survive out here without identification, without some kind of an identity. You can't get a job. You can't get a bank account. You can do nothing. You can't get a license. You can do nothing without an identity.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's for us, in this, both feet in both worlds, creating these resources and information. So that way, those that want to leave know what's required of them, just the basic information. So that way they can be as prepared as possible for when they need to leave. That's what I think is really important for us to do.
Yes. I have a wonderful idea. Is that we can really just
let's have it. Mary for president.
Yeah.
Why, thank you. Thank you. No, I have a wonderful idea of like we need to have, like Jasper said, we need to have policies and procedures so that plain
Yes.
people can get identification. We do need that. But for two, like just having a list of like things that you need. Because I think if we collaborate on a list of things that people need and we just have it publicly available, like it could be helpful
And
to
just have a little,
people.
like a little
Mhm.
card that's a
Yeah.
cheat sheet that
Right.
says if you leave,
Right.
because how many people are dying to get out? You know,
Yes.
they
Mhm.
need to get out to survive. They don't even know that they need an ID when they leave.
Well, and
Mhm.
you
You
don't
know?
have an idea. Like one of my luckiest things that I ever did was I took my Amish 8th grade diploma, and that really helped me establish who I was.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that was my whole form of identification. And I'm trying to get a job. I'm trying to go to the local community college. I'm trying to get a driver's license. And all I had was a diploma with my name on it. I'm shocked that I had it. I don't even know why I grabbed it. I had it for some reason.
Yeah.
All I had was my birth certificate. I did manage to have that, but even with that, I had to go through so many steps to prove who I was, like to get any form of identification, to get my social security card, all that kind of stuff. It was a nightmare, and I didn't know what I was doing. Like I was navigating this completely in the dark. I mean, good grief. When you come out as an Amish woman, you don't know anything about society. You know how to grocery shop. That's about it.
And cook dinner. You know how to cook dinner and clean, Audrey. Come on.
Well,
We
I'm
learned
saying,
how
in
to
the outside
garden,
world,
too.
we know how to go to the grocery store and buy groceries, but anything in the outside world, otherwise we don't know.
Oh
And
my
so
God.
there's a misconception, though, that from the outside world looking in, that because you get a free pass out of jail with Rumspringa, that somehow you're supposed to learn all these things when you're 16. So if you decide to leave, well, you've already had an introduction to the real world in your crash course, and you should obviously know this. That is not the case. It's not the case.
That's a lie. That's
Yeah.
why I put aluminum foil in the microwave. It was great.
Oh, that's
I didn't
put
know
a-
this
I put
happened.
electric
Like,
scale in the water. I got a job at this subway shop, and I was just learning about electricity and stuff. And she said, wash the scale, this electric scale, and I stuck it in the water. I was washing. She made me pay for it. She took it out of my paycheck. She's like, why would you? What? She's like, are you drunk? That's what she asked me. She didn't know I was Amish.
Wow.
And then I started crying, and I told her I left her mom. She's like, really? She's like, you seem like a college educated girl. I was like, oh. She's like, I can't believe you'd put electric scale in the water and wash it like dishes.
we don't know that.
Yeah.
We don't know the
Exactly
most
that, yeah.
basic things
Right.
about, like, I didn't know how to cook on an electric stove or a gas stove.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
What about as you're talking, you're out of the community, do you believe that within the community that abuse can actually be slowed down? Is there any way? Yes, you do.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Okay.
If
Absolutely. Yeah.
if we can put enough resources and information, like even if it's putting flyers, little business cards, stuff like that in public places where Amish and plain people congregate, and Jasper and Misty and I and somebody else have been working on this project for terminology for them. I'm
Okay.
really excited about it. But the plan is for people having it access to it on our websites. They should be
Okay.
able to print it. They should be able to post it publicly. They should be able to create little what are they called? I can never remember the name, Jasper.
What I've
The
been
little
making,
things.
the trifolds?
Yes.
Yeah.
Those.
Yeah.
That that they can put in public places for them to get. And yes, that would make a difference, because
Okay.
How do we get it into the hands of people?
Right.
Because
That's
we
what
have,
I- you're
we are
right.
in the heart of
We are.
Amish
We're
and
here.
Mennonite community.
are
I
here.
mean,
Yeah.
they're all around us, and we
Yeah.
interact
So I'll
with them all the
send them.
time.
I'll send them to you, because I've been designing. What we've kind of done is collaborated and split the responsibility of doing this, and then also, which has really helped. So one of the things that's really important to us is making sure that we stay in our ethical lane and not just determine what a terminology is because we think that that's what it is. So we have a lot of people that are helping us that are on the outside that are clinical psychologists and people that are in positions where they can read and review and make sure that on their side it's ethical and appropriate. And so we're getting those back, and then I'm compiling everything into different formats. So I can send you all of that once I'm done. It'll be done by the end of this by the middle of July. I should be done with everything.
Oh, wow.
And we're breaking it down into very simplified terms. What's really important for us to realize and to remember, and this is why Mary and I went to this abuse meeting and will continue going to these things, is to see what is being preached and what is being taught, and then what the outside world is trying to communicate. And the disconnect between the two oftentimes comes from simplifying terms. The outside world assumes that people know what a federal offense means.
Yes.
All of these
or
things
what
that
a
we just
felony is.
What a felony is, what is okay, so let's talk about reporting really quickly, which is one thing that I thought about after I left this meeting. So we talked about mandatory reporting and what is mandatory reporting. But I believe that women in the church may not realize that they don't have to be a mandatory reporter in order to report and be believed.
Yeah, it's called permissive reporters.
Right. Or it's just a moral reporting, but they don't maybe know that because in the structure of the church, you have to go through certain steps in order to do things and to be validated in that. So they need to understand that while maybe they're not a mandatory reporter, they can still come forward and report and people will listen to them.
Yes.
So it's like these very simplified things that we know and take for granted that they don't know. What is the statute of limitations per state? That's one thing that I'm doing, is creating a pamphlet for each state that's an insert, that way they know, and then we can just update as we go. But these are important things because there's such an inconsistency we see in the statute of limitations. But what does that mean? What does it mean to be what does the statute of limitations actually mean broken down? So we have to just break these terminologies down into just really fundamental, very simplified terms in order to create knowledge. So that way then we can build on that. And that's one thing that Mary and I saw. There was like this little bit of just a higher education disconnect of terminology that we throw around in the outside world. So that's what we've been really working on, is really creating all those necessary things. So that way report can come forward. I think putting those of us that have left back in the communities as referees, we are now on the playground with our whistle and we are saying, you do not get to throw the dodgeball at that child anymore. And people are going to turn a blind eye because you're on their team. So that's a lot of it too, where it's like, will the abuse change because they're willing? Probably not. But will the abuse change because all of a sudden they are being watched? Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yes.
Good.
Yeah. And, this is another really important aspect too. I hope you guys are creating resources for this too, but, Mary and Audrey and I have talked about the need for, people to be trained in hospitals, your nursing staff, your doctors, because, when they come in and my office at the church building is literally right next, I'm looking at our hospital. And I see Amish in and out and in and out and in and out all day long. So, the question is, what do we do to train them so that when they come in and you have things like, all these bruises underneath your dress, and you have men speaking on behalf of the wife,
a man
and
escorting the woman,
and don't allow them to talk, or they start speaking in Pennsylvania Dutch. How do you train
number one, do not ever, I think it's important for healthcare providers to know, do not ever start questioning a woman about abuse in front of a man or with another person from the community present.
See, that needs to be in writing on. That needs to be in writing on these resources that you guys are providing, because people don't know that. We don't.
So that's number one. Do not bring that topic up while that man or while that other Amish person is present, because even if it's not a man, like women will police each other up. It is a society that is created to where basically you have a watcher, you have watchers that will report back, and you will pay for every sin that you committed, whether it's words that you spoke or whatever they consider it to be. So, and the other thing is consider if it's, especially if it's children, or even if somebody is very wary of speaking, consider reaching out to an advocate who does speak Pennsylvania Dutch.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would definitely suggest that. There are people working on being.
I think that, and then also I think just like what you see in the bar scene now, for there's certain symbols and certain things that you can say to a bartender if you feel like you're going to be if you're being stalked or anything like that, maybe creating some sort of universal sign that you can tell a child, like, hey, you know, if you feel like if you're being abused or you're in danger, put your covering strings on in front instead of in back, or, you know, something like that. Some sort of way to signal that they need help without ever verbally saying that they need help. Maybe easier because they may not know the right words to say what is happening to them. They may not know that what is happening to them is abuse, because they're told that masturbation is self-abuse, so, and self-harm. So there's just so many different disconnects there.
Yeah.
There's so many disconnects, and that was, as you guys were talking, you know, women don't even know what mandatory reporting is. Well, what is that? Like, they're supposed to go to the CCI board. They're supposed to go, you know, there's so many that the church has it set up where they have to go through so many different avenues before they even get to law enforcement. Nothing ever reaches law enforcement. They don't even know what is reporting. Who do I report to? They don't even know it's sexual abuse. I mean, you wouldn't believe how many women look at me and, oh, that's what you call it? It's so normalized. They have no reference point.
No, and part of what makes that happen is the fact that women are also punished for not upholding their marriage beds properly, because you know, you're not allowed to say no. If you're married to somebody, you basically are that person's property, and if they want to have sex, you are required to have sex. If you don't, you will be confessing. So that's another way they manipulate the whole story.
Yeah. Wow.
It's just complex. There's a lot of complexities there. So it's just learning how to break down the complexities and create the resources that can at least start the conversations, and really kind of start merging the gap. That's what really needs to be done at this point, because there's no way that we could teach you in a like, hey, let's do a 48-hour, you know, let's do a weekend training on this. No. Like, there's no way. But if we can slowly start working towards that, and then kind of familiarize the communities that way, if you don't know, at least then you can say, oh, I've got this pamphlet, or I've got this, you know, and I can start there at least.
And I think like I really want to put this out here for our listeners too. Like, we need you guys and you guys need us, right? Yes. Like, we absolutely have to be working together, period.
Yes.
There's no other way around it. It's not like, oh, well, you know, Misty and Mary and Audrey and Jasper, they're out there doing this great work, and isn't that fantastic? And we're going to stand on the sidelines and applaud them. It doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work that way. And really quickly, let's take this home with the fact that these communities need to understand that there are sexual predators in their communities, and they are not just going to stay contained in the Amish culture.
Yeah.
If you have sexual predators within the Amish culture, you have sexual predators in your community. They're not being reported. They may be delivering your milk. They may be around your children. And there's not like this invisible electric fence that's keeping them contained to abuse within the community alone. That's something that's there. That's a mindset that's there.
That's a great point. And that's a two-way street too, because there are people going into the Amish communities who are predators, who are from, you know, the English world, who know they can spot a victim a mile away. And it's like, this happens in the mission field all the time. You know, missionaries, they have all these short-term mission trips where they'll go overseas and they'll spend a week and they'll go to an orphanage, and, you know, they're sending pictures back to their home congregation in the United States, and they're being applauded and, you know, what wonderful people. And they're going and they're visiting these orphans and they're holding them. Meanwhile, they're over there raping these
Abusing
children,
them, yeah.
you know, because
Yeah.
they know.
Right.
Abuse.
Yeah. I mean, that's a two-way
Abuse.
street.
Here's the thing that I've learned from all the stories that I've heard, because I've heard stories from people from all walks and ways of life. And the thing is that abuse is not just an Amish issue.
Oh, yeah.
We need to all collaborate together. It is an American issue. The
Mhm.
child sexual abuse issue is an American issue. And until we all collaborate on it, we're not going to have any real answers. We're going to have judges continuing to throw, like, let's just give him 18 months probation or
Right.
whatever it is. Until we all work together, we're not going to make headways.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
Well, and I don't think until we address the domestic violence piece, I don't think we're going to make much headway with sexual abuse, because it all goes back to the mindset around women and children and the entitlement of men.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a great point too, that, it's such a complex, multifaceted arena. And, I think I see it happen. So I assume it happens often, where Amish people get a tiny little slap on the wrist because, they're these quiet people. They don't bother anybody out here. They're kind, they're religious. They're contributors to society. So we're going to give them a break, and judges do it all the time.
They're also easy because when they do sit down, they normally admit guilt immediately. They don't try and hide it. So it's kind of like, everybody that's interrogating and used to like having to dig and really go into it, it's like, oh, really? Oh, okay. Well, this was so easy, and this cut off like so much time.
So
and they were so forthcoming.
Right.
Yes.
And then they have the perpetrator sitting in court, and I'm telling you, I'll never stop hearing his voice going, "I am sorry, Amish, for giving you a bad name." Literally crying in court.
Yeah.
I think one thing to that, like that's something that's really that really needs to be changed in our judicial system, is the idea of plea deals. And especially for the plain people, because the idea of getting a plea deal is that you supposedly admitted you're sorry, you're wrong, you admitted what you did. And the whole idea about that is that because you showed this remorse, this willingness to cooperate, that maybe you're somehow sorry for what you did, you're not going to maybe not do it again. So you get this shorter sentence. But what the judicial system needs to realize is, with plain people, they are taught that, confess your sins and you are forgiven. So they believe if they just confess, nothing should happen to them. Like, they don't believe they should go to jail. They don't believe, that God will hold it against them. So the judicial system takes that and like, oh, they're remorseful. They're probably not going to reoffend, or, all of this stuff. And they give them this shorter sentence. Like, there's this case in Ohio. I know that the guy got 2 years for raping boys. He was an Amish guy. And, how, especially for the judicial system, like when you have a child molester or, rapist in your grasp, why would you let them go after 2 years? Like, we need to overturn that and fix that, because how does that make any sense? Like, is there any data out there showing that child rapists have recovered, have,
No, there's not. No, I can tell you as an expert.
Actually,
why would they do that?
I actually published a blog this week done by somebody who had looked into the recidivism. I think that's how you pronounce that word.
Correct.
Yes.
It's on my website. But the thing is there's some very specific numbers and data and research about that, Misty, and we can talk about that later. I can't remember all the facts right here, but it was really good. It was really well written. We have supporting PDFs to go with it that people have been able to send to like district attorneys' offices. Part of the issue also that I see that goes back to what Misty was talking about is, so even though he got 2 years, do you know if he was still able to go to Amish church? Because what's an Amish church?
This particular guy wasn't. Like they kept him in there for the 2 years, but the 2 years is up now. So
Oh, okay. Well,
in 2
one of my
years.
perpetrators, he got a year in the county jail with a work release, and he was
Exactly.
allowed to go to Amish church, and they never removed access to victims. They literally never, ever
Yeah.
removed access.
I can
But
tell
going
you
back
it is
to-
extremely rare for a judicial system to say that a perpetrator can't go back to church.
Yeah,
It is
but going-
extremely rare.
Going back to what we first talked about, where they are playing the English world. It is all a game to them.
Yeah.
And the judicial system is just, they're falling for the manipulation. They're falling
Yes.
for this whole thing because it's validating their egotistical view that they are above the law. And so as long as I report and as long as I do this, then I'm going to be showed favoritism because I am God's chosen church, blah, 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 blah. And everybody in the outside world is like, yes, that's right. You are.
Meanwhile,
The cycle, it feeds the cycle. It's people
Yep.
coming in and saying, you get full sentencing here and you're a POS and we don't care about your damn religion at all. You can take your jam and shove it. You are a predator. Like, until we see that coming through and not this whole empathy towards these people in black, it's not going to change as much as it needs to.
Jasper, I think just as within the communities that you're speaking of, you all have a brainwashing. We have had a brainwashing to respect, to admire, to almost have a certain jealousy of the Amish and Mennonite communities as being pure and wholesome.
Good family people.
Yes. And when
so
we see the little
forgiving.
horse-drawn buggies go along, I mean, I've often just pulled off the side of the road and
Just to
watched.
watch,
And thought, that's beautiful. They're going to church and they'll sit, for
Kids
hours.
have their arms around each other in the back of
Yes.
the buggy and they're,
So-
they're waving when they go by.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think as we bring this forum to a close, I think we've set a real educational foundation for both sides. And I think we need to continue, as you all have said, to build together on this
Yep.
foundation of education, because we need to break the cycle of brainwashing that we have too.
Right.
I would often buy books written, about the Amish and whatnot, simply because it has this cute little picture of an Amish, seriously,
I
Amish
know.
child. But
I
since
know.
I've been talking to you all, I will have you know, I passed up several books. I just picked one up the other day and put it back, and I thought, I don't want to read that garbage. I don't want to read the lies anymore. So I think we're beginning to lay a foundation of education that we all really need to kind of vow to each other that we'll continue building on, so that we can break these horrible, horrific cycles of abuse within, both communities, actually.
Well, we have to bridge the cultural gap.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have to bridge that gap.
we
And
do.
the way that we do it is by having these conversations.
Yes.
Thank you for having us.
Oh,
Thank
thank
you.
you all. This,
Yeah, you
this
guys
has been
are amazing.
amazing. It really has been.
And I want to do, I don't know when, because it's so hard with our schedules, I know. But
Yeah.
I know that we need to have a follow-up and just talk about the
Absolutely.
practical side of it. How do we get advocates in the courtroom? Anytime that an Amish person is being sentenced, we need somebody who will stand up and say, this is what really goes on behind that curtain within these communities. When we're in the hospitals, how do we get literature in the hands of
That's what I was
doctors
going
and
to ask.
nurses?
How we
And-
have Mary and Jasper now that are going to pass on literature to
Yeah.
us. Where are the best places, and how do we get
Yeah,
that literature into these places,
Yeah.
so that people can act, who are in need, read
So-
this and get these resources.
My thoughts on that is like, usually Amish people will go to the sale barns. They go to the sale barns where they sell the cattle
Right.
and the horses and stuff like that. that's a really good place to start. Another one is they go to your local Walmart, see if you can put anything there.
Oh, I see that. Yeah.
They-
Yeah, they're
constantly.
They go
always-
to
yeah,
the,
all the time.
But we'd have to get
They go-
permission to.
Yes.
We know people.
Yeah, we do.
It's,
Yeah. They
it's just-
also go to the hardware stores.
Yeah.
They go
Yes.
to
Tractor
sometimes
Supply. I see. Yeah.
sometimes I've heard reports that some of them go to the local libraries.
Okay.
So those
Yeah.
are some of my suggestions.
well, there's
Okay.
that, but then also I think what Claire and Jimmy were saying was, how do we get that into the hands of the outside world? How do we
Yes.
start,
Outside world, yeah.
like, how do we
Yes.
help the
Right.
medical staff? And it really comes down to building out this infrastructure of understanding that nothing's really going to change into, like, we can have these conversations and they're great, but like, until we start creating the resources, which we have,
Yes.
and then hitting the pavement and having trainings and coming in and
Yes.
just doing a, hey, this is just the basics, like, and just do a basic starting out into different hospitals, into different working with victim advocates, and not mudding. We have to stay in our lanes.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
We
Yes.
have to
Yes.
stay in our lanes and understand that we aren't lawyers. We are not social workers. We are not
Right.
medical providers. Misty, you are. But unless we are,
Mhm.
but we can be a liaison between the two, and
Yes.
we can really help support them and
Mhm.
understand how they need to support the
Right.
victims. That's really it.
I think
So-
we need a part 2.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
definitely, we definitely need to follow up.
Yeah.
I think we
sorry.
do. Yeah.
So
I had
It's
this
just gonna
idea. I don't know if it would work, but I had this idea. So, I was in nursing school. I'm a nurse. So when I was in nursing school, I was surprised because we had this, small, tiny day in nursing school where we had to learn, about Jehovah's Witness, not, wanting blood transfusions. And they mentioned the Amish. They said, so for Jehovah, they had Seventh-day Adventists, their diet, all of these religions, you had to learn these different things for, if you're a nurse for, somebody from one of these specific religions. And then they had Amish in there. They had Amish, I can't remember. They mentioned Amish and some other strict Christian religion. I can't remember what it was. But they said, when questioning to them, always make sure the man is present. That was in my nursing.
Are you serious?
They said always
Wow.
refer to the man. The women are usually submissive. It was some paragraph in there. I need to find it and take a picture. But I had this idea when I was in school. This was a few years ago. I thought if we could make out flyers just to hand out, to take to the nursing school, because nursing schools are very receptive. They are very wanting to educate their nurses better. So if we could take some flyers into nursing schools, I mean, future nurses could educate doctors, they could educate social workers, they could educate everything. And I've had several nurses read my memoir, a few professors, a couple of professors like brought it to their class and talked about it. So people, if they get the material, they are willing to talk about it and learn about it. And I just thought nursing schools would be fantastic because, nurses are the basic of any hospital, any health.
And medical schools, add medical schools to that too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think it's what it's really going to take is funding for those of us who really want to do this work. So that way we can go in and teach and just explain the basics, go in and public speak and answer all the questions and kind of, just sort out. That's what it's going to take. It's going to take money. So that way we can travel and we can just start having these, just like what we just conversed over the last hour, and have that in an educational setting, whether that's within school structures or within hospitals or within the judicial system.
It's like a PowerPoint, like a PowerPoint presentation. In one of my classes, pediatrics, my instructor actually asked me to speak in front of the class and educate them about Amish children and stuff like that. So, I think it would be very easy to get into some schools, like nursing schools, maybe community colleges, and with PowerPoint presentations. And that, when you're doing that, you're like talking to like 60 to 100 people at one time. Like my nursing class at any given time was about 60 people. So, I mean, that's 60 nurses that are going to go into all different hospitals, and they're going to talk to all different other nurses and doctors that don't know about it. And they're just going to sort of It's like missionary work. They're just going to spread the word.
Yeah.
Well,
We're
can I-
just Johnny Appleseeding our way through
Yeah.
just the different structures to tell people.
Which is also why I made a PowerPoint about this very issue. And it is recorded. It is on YouTube. It's called Casting Light on Amish Shadows.
Send me the link to that, Mary, and we'll put it in the
Yeah.
description of this podcast.
Okay.
Awesome.
I will do that.
Awesome.
But at the end of the day, like Jasper said, it will take money. And that's another thing, is like people are willing to support us to a certain extent.
Right.
But as we all fund our projects, you know, there's a lack of financial support.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's
So there's that.
And volunteers from the Plain community to come in and, somebody to organize those volunteers and, to have them, go into the colleges and I think educating in the colleges and the, nursing schools, stuff like that. I mean, I think that would really, even, police stations, go in and give a class at the police station, 1 hour class. I mean, just think, if you educate one person, think how many people that one person that you touch could educate.
Yep.
They could educate so many
Yep.
people.
Right.
So we're talking about two different types of advocacy here. And this is one thing I realized last year. You can work in abuse or on abuse. And for me, I realized I wanted to work on abuse. So this educational platform and resources and going and doing this is working on the issue and isn't the same as supporting victims. And, there's also that nurturing side of really working with an actual victim, which Audrey really does. And so I think it's important to clarify that, like, we don't have to be all. And so it's okay to just kind of take this more educational approach. And then we also have people on the inside that are supporting victims as they come out and all of that. It's going to take all kinds of
It
time.
takes all of
order-
us. Yes.
Yeah.
It does.
So, a lot of former plain women aren't necessarily comfortable in public speaking or going in front of, and that's okay. There's still a place for them. There's still a need for them. There's other places that they can be really, really beneficial. So I don't want to discredit or make people think that they have to do that in order to make it and create an impact or change.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Point two.
Sorry, go ahead, Audrey.
Well, I think two other things that are important to mention here is there's more and more of us women stepping out and stepping up, but we need men.
Yes.
We need men to step up, and we need men to start using their voices, and we need men to start saying, this has to stop. It's extremely important
That's a great
that the
point.
men
It
step
is.
in.
Yeah.
And the other piece is, as a survivor myself, I've had to do so much advocacy within the justice system for my children. I had to educate the DA. I had to educate the police. I had to educate the advocacy workers from rape crisis and domestic violence. I had to educate. I couldn't just be a survivor going in and getting help. And so now they sit there and they look at me and they're like, this is the biggest joke we've ever seen. Like, these people play games. But they didn't know that prior to this. And so that's where the educational piece for the outside world is just as big as the educational piece for the inside, because before that, they had no concept of what really happens in these communities. And we're over 2 years in, and they're going, wow. But it took almost 2 years for them to really get it. And so it's a process, like Jasper was saying, it's a process, and it's not going to happen overnight, but we have to start somewhere outside as well as inside.
And that's why we all need to work together, because that shouldn't fall on the shoulders of an abuse survivor to report, to try to find an identity, to try to learn how to survive in the outside world, and to try to educate people in all those different avenues that are the only thing that can save you. Like, that shouldn't fall on the shoulders of the survivors. It shouldn't.
That should never have been your story, Audrey.
Yeah.
I'm sorry that you went through this.
Well, I think we're
over time
changing the world. Yeah. This is going to be a long episode, but it's
Oh my.
it's
But
a
it was good.
twofer. That's what I always call them. You just cut it in half.
It's a twofer.
Yeah.
Cut it in half. People will appreciate that.
Yeah. So Well, I want to thank you guys again.
Yes.
This has been really incredible, very educational for us, for sure.
Absolutely.
Um,
I'm all tensed up though. Wow. God.
well,
Why are you all
I
tensed up?
Learned
because
a lot.
Audrey, because of
just-
Audrey's dress, the way that she dresses today, got her all nerved out.
It's the
I
elbows.
thought it was
I
a
see so many.
t-shirt. Oh my
I
God.
see so many elbows happening right now.
Look, just
Oh.
like this.
Wait.
So many boobs.
We got to do it
Wait,
together, all of
everybody
us.
put your elbows up. I want a picture of this.
Oh, boy. You ladies, you're wonderful. Thank you all so much. From the depths of our hearts, thank you for your time. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for being brave enough to step out when you had really no help or no path to follow. Thank you for creating paths for others to follow. Just thank you for being you. We appreciate each and every one of you so very much. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you next round.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode. Thank you to our patrons who make the podcast possible. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker and search for the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast in your favorite podcast app. Be sure to hit subscribe and rate the show. If you believe in what we do, consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron and check out the cool rewards our patrons receive. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.